applying the concepts for the rest of the term. And so this was, I'll go ahead and give her words. And I asked her, this was a couple of things, when I say a couple of things ago, they have these great community developer events. They're called SQL Saturday. And there was one in Charleston last Saturday. I just couldn't make it. I signed up for it. There's one in Charlotte coming up, free, all-day content about using databases and that kind of thing. Might still wiggle her back into this class, but this person, she's half of a company called DataChecks, and just had a great presentation about this idea of envisioning what a database ought to do. But and she's really aimed at the, kind of the end users, administrators, as much as she was after the people who work things technically. So anyway, so I'm borrowing the shtick from her, and it was a pretty good one. So you understand a little bit about the relational model, tables and lists, okay? But getting to that model, what are our tables? What are the attributes? How do we get from thoughts and things that we know we want to do to something that's going to be a database that supports it? Right? That's what the entire class is about. And so she kind of runs you through, using an example of hers, how to think about it. So, and this is great stuff here if you're on the user side where you have requirements, or if you're on the doer side where you actually have to do it. And she insisted that, Todd, if you're going to borrow this, you have to read this whole interview to them so they understand. So you as a database person get pulled into the office, so you have an executive in there. Yeah, so I don't know if you know this about me, but I spent the better part of the 80s in the Peace Corps. Those were the days. Nothing but a cook fire in a hut. You can't imagine the fun I had. But enough about saving the world and on to why I called you in here. I realized that by being away from electricity for 8 years, I missed out on a golden age of cinema. I just got a Netflix subscription, and I've been catching up on movies I never saw. Do you know who Molly Ringwald is? Tell me. How did she never win an Oscar? Snubbed, I tell you. I've been keeping track of the movies I watch on a spreadsheet, but it's getting unwieldy. I like to record the movie, cast, when it was released, box office numbers, and so on. While I'm watching, I take down memorable quotes so that I can memorize them and throw them out at parties. You know me, always up on the hipster lingo. What I need is a better way to keep all this together. I know this takes you away from your current project, but could you throw something together for me over the weekend? I'm going to ask one of our application developers to give me a snazzy front end so I can enter all the information. Oh, I almost forgot. I rate the movies after I watch them, 1 to 5 stars and so on. Eventually, I'd like to report my movies like show me all the films co-starring that kid from Weird Science. With date watch, stars, co-stars, director, total number of montages, you know, the critical stuff. Yep. So off you go. I can't wait to see what you come up with. User interviews. You're going to be giving them. How do these, the administrative, the technical people will be hearing them. I laughed out loud when she said, okay, that's what you got from the interview. That's what you should remember from the interview. Realize that when somebody talks or describes the whole situation, they're giving you a lot of things that you're going to have to distill. They're not going to come in and an end user isn't going to say, oh, I need 3 entities. The attributes are going, that's not how they're going to go, but that's where you need to end up. And so the first step in data modeling, especially working on the Hudson Bay project, is thinking about what are the things that they're tracking, and think about that first. And then secondarily, what are the attributes of the things they're tracking? And so everything else that got crossed out didn't help in terms of the data management. Now, if you're going to get into the consulting business, you still need to put up with that, and you still need to help guide them. But the idea is, so there's things that came out, movies, cast, when released, quotes, rate movies, 1 to 5 stars, date watched, and those are the important things out of this. And when you do data modeling, if you do it from the get-go, we're going to be jumping in our practical work in the middle, is start with a conceptual model, develop what's called a logical model, then an ERD, and then what's called a physical model. And you'll kind of be able to see, gosh, we've sort of done a lot of these already. But a conceptual model is really just circles that have the things that you want to track. Okay? It's a good way to capture these big ideas. Non-technical users can understand them. It's something you could show back to that executive. Though it does get some questions out early, lots of goods. Y'all know what a baseline is? Who can define a baseline? Okay, that's Management 101 kind of stuff. A baseline is some example, some existing maybe knowledge that then, when you get something new, you can compare it against to see if we're improving. We're looking for a new computer science professor. Okay? We've got some applications in now, and I'm making the team, okay, sort of direct them, meet today to call the applications we have. A couple of them say, no, we don't have all the applications in. We don't want to evaluate them. If we look at what we have now, we do have a baseline. Out of the 30-some, there's probably 5 who are pretty good. When new ones come in, we can compare those against the baseline to say, are these keepers or not? It does help you be more productive. So a lot of times in data management, well, that's the way to manage anything, right? Now, here's an example or a baseline or a start. But here, let's get a start on how we think the data is going to go. Keep it on paper or in Visio diagrams, just because maybe they look a little prettier. But before we start getting into access and adding data, we have that baseline, okay? And it's really function what you need over form and one sheet of paper, okay? She wasn't quite a movie, because I'm a book reader as well. So you get the quotes at the bottom. I don't know how they really help. She's better at being engaging on that part. So if you want an example of what might a conceptual model for a database look like, well, it looks kind of like an ERD, right? It was just kind of the circles and arrows. They haven't labeled these relationships, but there's this thing called a movie, right? And a movie has connected to something called the box office and a viewer rating. Oh, and movies have quotes. Of our 2 documentation techniques for data models, which one is this closer to? Chins or Crowsfoot? Chins, right? It's a takeoff of that. Is it exactly? No. And in a lot of ways, exactly chins is a broad thing, but it's just a way, and you can draw circles, put things in, and that's really where you ought to start. They have a kind of it's a little complicated. Movies have casts, and maybe we think of the director. If you want to keep track of the director, that's kind of part of the cast, at least at the first cut. That was the thinking. Not to say that this is perfect, or gee, I've written it down once, don't ask me to change. It's a baseline. I may change it, but at least I have something to show. And it's actors, supply quotes and that kind of thing. What that motivates in the data analysis is, going back, and it allows you to ask questions, right? So if you're really then responsible for making this happen, the next thing that comes up, okay, you asked about box office, right? Which box offices? Okay, well, the answer was, we're pretending, went back, we need all of the box office numbers. What you're clicking is, if it was just U.S. box office, what's the relationship between movie and box office? 1-to-1 or 1-to-many? If we're only interested in one kind of box office, we only need one. If they want lots of box offices, our data wheels are going, okay, somewhere along the line I'm going to need a 1-to-many. I'm not worried about putting it down now, but it's these kinds of things that are important. If you're the ones providing the information, it's important that your developer understand. Oh, we're going to need multiple of these. Okay, character names, right? Do you just need to know that it, starred Al Pacino, or do you know that it's Scarface or whatever was the name, and maybe nicknames too, right? Producer, we don't care. What's the difference between the producer and the director of a movie? Anybody know? Producer's the money, usually, right? And the kind of the advertising, the director makes it happen, and only whole number ratings. But see, these are questions that even with your experience in database so far, you can say, okay, it's important to get the answers. This last one speaks to what kind of data type will we be and here, I got to remember to turn on the laser pointer sometimes if I'm pointing to things. So, the next idea is ask some questions, and that led in this case, and we're not necessarily here to, well, how did she know to get here? But as a result, refined. It's called refactored, that model. It said, as I'm thinking about it, movies really have characters. if we need to know character names, and characters are played by an actor, and characters have quotes. You get into a little bit of difficulty. We're thinking about the cardinality. One character, how many actors? Not always. A lot of movies have had several actors playing the same character. Sometimes this is the young Thomas Jefferson, this is the middle-aged, this is the old Thomas Jefferson. And there was the movie, maybe Cloud Atlas has that kind of thing going. And then there was the movie, there was the guy, somebody died, forgotten the movie now, but 3 different people actually played the person. They finished the production, and so you had 3 different actors, even though they were the same age, they looked a little bit different. But anyway, how about actor to character in a movie? Can you think of any movies where one actor played multiple characters? Oh yeah, there's lots of them. So it seems like there's a one-to-one, but really, if you want to keep track of it, it's a complicated relationship. You're not worried about this yet, but it sets the stage for that kind of thing. Okay? One character, many quotes, and that kind of thing. Great. So, at a conceptual model, then we get to something you've heard of, and you've done a couple of, and you're going to get to do another one, everybody is, or 2 or 3, because it's how we communicate what we're thinking about a database, or what we've done in a database, and the ER. ER is short for entity relationship, right? Okay. So entities are going to be tables, most probably. Yeah, I can find some cases where that is, and relationships describe what happens between that. Entity is a singular noun. She insists on that. I kind of told you I kind of like plurals, and it's it's an issue under discussion out there in the data management world about which way they ought to go. Relationship types, and it has to do with the cardinality. Now we're a little advanced. We realize it's not as easy as just one-to-many. It could be 0 or 1, or exactly 1, to 0 or many, or 1 or many, right? We have minimum and maximum cardinality, but usually you think about the maximal cardinality, right? So the wheels start turning for that. And the ER diagram is the first time to that you take and have something that looks something like a database. We're not going to dive into normalization. Anybody can tell me what database, especially in the back, any computer science test can tell me what database normalization is? Well, by next week, we'll all have. Okay, what would you say? You make it better for the RDBMS, Relational Database Management System, to work with, but it's rules for how do I know my entities are the right ones for the purposes I have. And all I can do is say it really depends on the key. And next week's lecture that you get virtually is what normalization is. You both have something to read about it this week, or both groups have too, so we'll get that. But talked about normalization, but you want each entity to represent one thing. You don't want to mix movies and actors in the same list. They're 2 separate things. And that's really the root of what normalization is. Attributes in a table depend on just the primary key, so don't despair. I know everybody wants to dive in and get deeper into normalization right now. That's next week. But what it looks like, as a start, is this ERD. Oh, which of our 2 formats for doing ERDs is this? Crowsplit, right? So these are the ways, I'm not trying to overdo, but the kinds of things that you've mucked with are the ways that we have for communicating on what our ideas are. And you're getting good now, and maybe it was almost from the thing, but you can tell me, if I was going to build a database, what the database tables would be, what the primary keys would be, what the foreign keys that link back to the primary keys are, something about, at least in their mind's eye, what the relationships were. They're using the 2-headed beast, right? This is 0 or more, so a director might not have done any movies, at least according to their thinking, right? But a movie, I don't know, can a movie have more than one director? the way they're modeling this is that maybe they'll have to identify the lead director, or the key director, or the main director. This, I can tell, is they're modeling it as one and exactly one. So we're not here, well, this would be the time to say, gee, Ms. Hammonds, I think if you're doing that database, you might need to think about this. But we can read through this diagram and understand that a character can do many quotes. Let's see, that they left it as a character. Well, let's see, how many actors can play a character in this model? At most one, all right? Kind of saying a character is played by at most one, but a way around that is don't have a character, Thomas Jefferson, have young Thomas Jefferson, played by this one. Middle-aged Thomas Jefferson, played by. So if we talk about separate the characters that way, that's a way to keep it as a one relationship. Okay. But the point is, this is the next level of refinement. Notice what they're staying away from is worrying about what are all the other attributes of a rating. Oh, by the way, for you all in Tech Prac 8 doing the ERD that you're going to do, this is the level I'm talking about. Show me the, no, it's actually the next level. We'll take that back. We're going to look at the attributes. But at this level, we're not worried about what are all the other columns. We are, okay, so it's a representation. So conceptual gets refined to an ER diagram. And when you have the ER diagram, what you ought to do is see, well, and I was doing that a little bit here. Well, what about putting in data? So what if you put in war games? Well, what would I do for, okay, I guess John Badham is the director. I remember Matthew Broderick and these, okay, and each of those goes to a character, got a quote, box office. And so, be thinking about, well, let's go back and look at that box office thing. Did they really give us a way to get multiple box office? Right, they're saying, like the Japanese box office might apply to many movies, and a particular movie has different box offices, Japan, US, Europe, and that kind of thing. And so where you ought to be is, okay, when I get these data, are they going to fit in there? And can I get the right things? And so it seems to work. How do we resolve end-to-end relationships in a relational database? We all answered a discussion question on it, and most of us nailed it. So how do we do something about like this relationship that says we've got a many-to-many going on here? Yeah, so you're going to introduce, sometimes it's called a junction table or an extra table or something that falls in between, and it usually borrows from this and this. So we have a movie box office record, this movie, that box office. War Games US, War Games Japanese. Tale of Two Cities, Japanese, Tale of Two Cities, Europe. And so something that it's called a junction table. Usually it'll have that composite key thing going on because it needs those two foreign keys. There's some ways around that, but okay. So M to M really need to be resolved down to one to many and a many to one. And so that's take two on the ERD diagram. So it's just a refinement, but you don't jump in necessarily and get your full representation at the start. Actually, what you'll be doing for me this week, I should have said, is the logical model, at least according to here. It's a representation of the database. Basically, I'll give you the peak, and then we can look at the, what the rules are. It takes those entities and then starts filling out with, well, what are the attributes that we're going to keep track of? When we talk about a rating, maybe we need a rating value. The box office, how much was made, for a quote, maybe the character, you've got a quote at it, so that the character going back in a quote. Right? Movies is a little bit, we need the name, year release, when they did it, when we viewed, maybe last viewing, because what if you watch a movie multiple times? It comes to mind, well, I'm not sure what a montage is. Okay? But the idea of a logical model, tables with attributes, but we're not worried about the types. Okay? That's the level you'll be at. Continue to look, and this is just, you can do it by example. You're always worried about when you have repeating values. because movies get released and re-released and that kind of thing. And so if you have a year released, maybe you need a new entity, something about release year, on like that. But anytime you're trying to put multiple things in one cell, that's bad. We'll talk about it next to one column. That's bad. And so here's a refined look at the logical model. And if we had to, we could pick out what to do, and you could make a great beginning on building this as a database. The only thing that's missing here is what types there are. Okay? And that brings, and the last is the physical model. Okay? And doesn't look much different, but don't worry about pinning down types. They look very close. And again, she says it doesn't mean skip this. Actually, the logical model makes the physical model duck soup. But in the physical model, you flush these things out with their types. These types, you might be used to kind of number and integer and text and that. These types happen to be SQL Server types. No big thing. Small n is an integer that can only get so big. Varchar is like text of 25, just different names. But the idea is this is now ready to give over to somebody who doesn't know anything about movies, doesn't know anything about the development process, but does know how to take a model and do a database. And you've been in that role in an earlier assignment or two, and that's the notion.
You're not asking for the doctor's side. What is the director first name, director last name?
Well, that is, this person, they asked for both of those.
Right, so are you like in the text that you put in the back and stuff there and asking them?
Right. Right. So what I'm looking in your tech practice, your result, at least in form, is going to look like this. It will have the attribute name.
Okay, but you don't have to
You don't need to give me that I'm going to make this a text 25 or a percent or whatever, because we're in the first chapter of that, we're listening to their requirements for the Hudson Bay and trying to identify what tables they need. So I'm expecting a diagram that looks something like this, or if you do chins, and then you can have the attributes lollipopping off. Yeah, so it's a logical model by this discussion that you're shooting for in that tech practice. But the physical model would be, before you can implement it or have somebody implement it, they've got to know, well, what types were you thinking, or if you leave it up to me, maybe it will come off. Okay? There's a concept, and I've mentioned it a few times, it's called refactoring. And refactoring is just the idea that once we've looked at the model, maybe once we've used the model, maybe we need to change it a little bit. And that's the concept of refactoring. And they do a refactoring. The idea is we document before we go. So we have a database document before we build it. And I've built some databases where I just start hacking it away in Access. And I usually regret it, or SQL Server. If I'd started at least with a logical diagram, I wouldn't, some of the times I'm doing the design while I'm doing the creation. And it can go well if it's simple, but it can unravel. A lot of communication kinds of things, well, we're working individually. That's the biggest downside of trying to get courses that are asynchronous and online, is it eliminates the team thing. Because in real life, it's not going to be you with an isolated assignment that I can do whenever I'm ready and kind of work through. The real work of administering or developing information systems is working in teams and being sure you get a collaborative understanding. Just looking at ways for doing it that you guys get nice siloed one-off assignments. Well, not one-off. They might build, but they're not sideways independent upon somebody else. Okay, so. And it could look for, allow for multiple movie releases. So they had that many-to-many, and they said, we have a release year and a release ID, and so when we re-release a movie, it put that in there. Okay. And so, a couple of thoughts, though, I've gotten where I wanted to be. Do stick with the naming convention, right? In yours, if you're going to do first name for things, you have director first name, then actor first name. Great. Don't do it director FN, actor first, producer first name. That's what it's meant by naming convention. You're also, if you follow the text, they like you to prefix your entity names with TBL So I've asked you to apply that because it's in the book. My personal thing is it's a little over, but there is this way of identifying what's going on. So that's something. It's important, and follow those patterns consistently. ID for columns. If there's there's going to be these surrogate keys that are auto numbers. ID. Stick with ID. Don't make the next one code and the next one none. It will help you in the long run. It'll help your reader in the long run. Style, another style thing I'd recommend, not going to take off, but these you usually kind of think about going from the things that are most identifying out to details as you go down the list. So usually the key columns come first, and then foreign keys, then facts about the movie. Maybe started with the most important. A movie had a movie name before it had a viewing date. That's not critical, but usually you think as you get over to the right-hand columns in a table, you're getting to the things that are maybe less critical. We don't have very large models in this. So they catch what's carpal tunnel syndrome? Right, 2S typing. So a lot of times you'd like to have names that are meaningful. If you just do FN, somebody might realize that that's first name. The first name of the director of the movie who this record is describing is a little bit long, so somewhere in the middle there of making a name that is consistent. If you use an abbreviation, then just use it consistently. That's the recommendation. And I already told style points. These are style points, right? Primary key, usually you list it first. I've seen types when it's in the middle. Foreign keys, you usually put those after the primary keys, and then things that got to go together, like all the business address stuff, ought to go together. Then put the business street address, and then put in the director's name, and then the movie address. It goes on. We don't have much metadata, but there are things sometimes that you'll put in a database, like the date that this record got updated, the user ID who updated the record. There are ways to get that stamped in automatically. And those kinds of things tend to be down at the end. All right? And if you want more practice, if you get done with the tech crack assignment, or for either of you say, gosh, I want to do another one. Okay, so she gives them some places out there that you can link to that I don't know if these links work, or if I can take them while I'm looking at this. As you see, but information is complicated. All right, more good recommended reading from a couple of years ago that I think this is the one, or it's like the one I'm putting the tech folks through. All right, so the real ideas, and they were mostly the style points, and you're shooting for a logical diagram of this assignment, but then there's a process of refinement, and you don't just sit down with a blank piece of paper and try to write that out first thing. All right, well, good. Seeing no questions, and so I shall stop the slideshow, and I think, even though it just kind of cranked up the hour,